My name is Michelle Adams, and this is my Week 6 multimedia presentation for History and Theory of Public Administration, talking about the federal government and the scope of the federal government. Today I'm going to be analyzing the scope of the United States Department of Health and Human Services, and I'm going to talk about the current role of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, arguments to expand the scope, arguments to decrease the scope, and then some final recommendations moving forward. When we talk about the current state of the Federal Department of Health and Human Services, their mission is to enhance and protect the health and well-being of all Americans. The scope and role by which they do that is providing for effective health and human services and fostering advances in medicine, public health, and social services. They do this in a number of ways. They do have a 4-year strategic plan that they've been focusing on for fiscal year 14-18. And their main focus for the past 4 years has really been strengthening healthcare, looking at the advancement of scientific knowledge and innovation, utilizing cross-agency collaborations and public-private partnerships to advance that scientific knowledge and innovation. And then also using the application of promising new scientific discoveries. All of this, once again, going back to strengthening healthcare. Their second pillar is advancing the health and safety and well-being of the American people, and once again, ensuring efficiency, transparency, accountability, and effectiveness, and doing this through performance tracking. When we talk about the expansion or the decrease of the role or scope of the Department of Health and Human Services, we really here in the state of California have a very robust healthcare system. We're very, in my opinion, well off when it comes to healthcare, rather than when you look at some of the other states within the United States. When you look at other countries, there's other options and opinions there, but I really wanted to go outside the state of California to get some outside perspective of what people think of the United States Department of Health and Human Services. In Washington, D.C., there is a institute called the Cato Institute, and they actually have a website that is completely dedicated to opinions regarding downsizing the government. When we talk about health and human services, one of or two of the areas where they would like to see a decrease in the scope and the role of the federal government is with Medicare and Medicaid. Where their opinion lies is they're not really picking at the effectiveness of the department or I don't want to say individual programs because they are, but they're not really picking at the efficiency or the effectiveness of the department, but more so how much resources are they throwing out there. In 2016, it was expected that the Department of Health and Human Services would spend about $1.1 trillion on Medicare and Medicaid. This broke down to approximately $8,800 per household, per U.S. household. And when we look at it in that sense, it's a little scary because that amount of money per household for the number of people who are not receiving the benefit is quite exorbitant. So one of their opinions was that there needs to be reforms associated with Medicare and Medicaid. The second thing that was heavily criticized was welfare. Many of the people that I talked to, a few of the organizations that I looked into, really wanted to see a decrease of the federal government's support of welfare. Many felt that this was an area where they would like to see private charities step in. People within specific regions or states that are familiar with regional demographics and needs should be able to step up and provide in that sense. One of the areas where I saw an agreement of expansion would be with Health and Human Services. More importantly, with regards to services and supports for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Here in California, we have what is called the Lanterman Act, and basically it states that it's legislation that has confirmed that every individual with an intellectual or developmental disability should be and will be provided the services and supports to live like a typical individual. So if somebody can't walk, there should be services and supports out there that will provide them with the most basic equipment and basic needs to be able to function like a typical individual. For people who are intellectually disabled, providing them services and supports to get a job, learn job skills, and live, work, and play like a typical individual would. Moving forward, a couple of the proposals that I would have, and they kind of go hand in hand, would be to look at the Department of Health and Human Services and expand the policy side. Really work with the Department of Health and Human Services to look at best practices. What are the states doing that is working, that is favorable, and really expand on those policies on a nationwide level. On the flip side of that, that means that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services would need to provide the resources for the states and local governments to implement these policies. Unfortunately, one of the things is that people think resources are just throw us money. I don't believe that. I think that if you give people the right tools, that they can implement a policy that will work for their region, work for their state. And those resources could be best practice programs. It could be public-private partnerships. It could be collaborations between different states. But I think there is some room for growth there. So just some food for thought. Wanted to share some of my resources with you. I went and I looked at the American Public Human Services Association. They had a really interesting article on human services in the 21st century. And this kind of talks about what is the government's role and how does it need to be transformed. It actually does go back and talk about the evolution of health and human services and how far we have come. The Cato Institute is, once again, another site that you can look at. It talks about downsizing government, but in a bunch of different realms, so you can get a lot of more work from there. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about the Lanterman Developmental Disabilities Act, I encourage you to check out the Frank Lanterman Regional Center page. They have a lot of information there. And then, of course, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So thank you again for your time today, and I hope everybody has a great weekend.